Okay, we decided that we should start at this point. So welcome everybody to this online panel discussion on deconstruction of the state capture in Serbia on case of the security services. First of all, I would like to share with you some technical questions. You can put the question during the conference on two ways. One of which is in Q&A sections. You can write it down, and when we get to the questions and the discussion on questions, you can raise the hand and you will be unmuted by our administrator. If the time frame for discussion is surpassed, some of the questions will be answered by email if it's the large amount of them. All of the attendees and the participants will be muted except for the speaker. One very significant detail is that this conference will be recorded. So first of all, I would like to give the floor, as we can say, to Igor Bandović, Director of Belgrade Center for Security Policy, for some introductory note. How it came for this research that you did in last 2 years, in 2019 and this year, and the origin of the term state capture from 2018 EU enlargement strategy issued by European Commission.
Thank you, Milan. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those who are watching us from overseas. Your Excellencies, friends and colleagues. Well, first of all, allow me to open this Belgrade Center for Security Policy event, which is titled Deconstruction of the State Capture in Serbia, the case of security sector. And as you can see, this event is commenced online, although it was planned to be a big conference organized here in Belgrade, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were not allowed to do that. And I hope that soon enough, we will organize something so we can see in a real and physical space. Yet, we are really grateful that so many of people who are attending this conference, over 70 participants registered for this event, which I think tells about the relevance of the topic and good timing for the discussion. This event is part of the project which is called Security Sector Reform, Untying the Knot of State Capture in Serbia, which is supported by National Endowment for Democracy. And we are really grateful for the NED for its continuous support and for recognizing the importance of our work. In addition, I want especially to thank our guest panelist and commentator today, Mr. Reinhard Priebe, who decided to join us. Thank you very much for this. Mr. Priebe's work in the region in recent years really was truly remarkable. And it serves for inspiration of many of us who are working on the rule of law, democracy, and European integration of the region. We hope to continue our cooperation with Mr. Priebe, not only for this project, but for the projects to come, as his expertise and authority in the matter is so valuable to all of us working in this area. So thank you again for being with us today. As for the report and presentation, my colleagues here at the BCSP did really genuine and I think pioneering work of deconstructing and attempting to really comprehensively approach the very complex phenomena of state capture. And apart from some ad hoc reactions and partial considerations, there is no comprehensive work or understanding how the state capture in Serbia has evolved or has been functioning. This project and this report aims to fill the gap by documenting and deconstructing the ongoing process of state capture in security sector, to presentation of mechanisms, actors, and consequences of this process. I believe that all of you who have registered for the event have received the report. This is only the shorter version of the report, and for those who are really interested in the subject, I invite you to soon go to web page or Belgrade Center for Security Policy for more detailed version of the report. So once again, thank you for the interest in the BCSP work. I wish all of us successful event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Igor. This report is tiled in 5 sections, and 5 teams of the researchers in Belgrade Center for Security Policy were doing it. So we have 5 members of the teams to give us the key points in the report, in the research. And first of them is Predrag Petrovic to tell us more about the political context of the capture of state in security sector.
Thank you, Milan. Political context is very important since state capture doesn't happen overnight or in any kind of limbo. Actually, we understand that state capture is a political project aimed at seizing levers of state power in order to be able to change formal rules of the game so that suit the specific interests of the narrow circle of individuals that are mostly linked to ruling political party or to their relatives or their friends. Of course, at the expense of public good and public interests. Another aspect of state capture is that it is aimed at control of enforcement of the law, implementation of the legislation, so that captures of the state are able to avoid prosecution, passed unpunished for the illicit doings, but also to be able or to be in the position to threat with the prosecution to anybody who oppose to their rule. So we can witness the widespread intimidation for opposition or to critical voices. So you can, from what I said, you can assume what are the difference between corruption and state capture, because many people tend to confuse corruption, systemic corruption, political corruption with state capture. But the key difference is a seizure of levers of power that enables that outcomes of the activities of the captures are certain. In the corruption activities, corruptive relationships, outcomes are not so certain because there are so many actors involved and so many competition. So I will repeat again, it is a political project that started in Serbia in 2012 with the elections, presidential and parliamentary, when Serbian Progressive Party won those elections and was in a position to form the government. And the first law that this new government amended was a law that was regulating and is still regulating the intelligence system. And the main reason behind these legislative changes was to enable Aleksandar Vučić. At that time, he was an acting president of Serbian Progressive Party and the deputy prime minister, to become chief of the body that was tasked for operational coordination of intelligence services. So he was in a position to control the body to which all important intelligence and security information flows in. And he made full use of this position for political gains. For instance, he was using this position for announcing arrests of allegedly corrupted business persons, which were followed by real arrests. For instance, one of the most famous or infamous controversial businessman, Miroslav Mišković, was arrested soon after the Serbian Progressive Party assumed the power. And that contributed to a real rise of popularity of Serbian Progressive Party, but also to Vučić himself. Public opinion polls had measured at that time that popularity of Serbian Progressive Party jumped from 24% to 40%. And this political capital had to be used in some way. So Serbian Progressive Party actually called snap elections in 2014, which ended in a landslide victory. Serbian Progressive Party achieved absolute majority in the Serbian parliament. This opened huge opportunity for Serbian Progressive Party, but also for leader of Serbian Progressive Party, Aleksandar Vučić, to strengthen his power in the society, but also within the party. For instance, he was able, through majority in the parliament, to pass legislation that not only was full of flaws or deficiencies, but the laws that were actually enacting very bad practice that was actually identified by think tanks, experts, and public as a quite corrosive to democracy and to anti-corruption efforts. But also, following after these elections, he was in a position to strengthen his control into other state institutions. For instance, just after the elections in 2014, President of High Court in Belgrade, under which auspices is operating special department for organized crime. The president of this court, it was appointing his close friend, Aleksandar Stepanović. And soon after, the prosecutor for organized crime was appointed. Also, he was a member of Old Boys Network, and that was Mladen Nenadić. So if you can now contemplate and you can look at how these changes evolved, you can see that Serbian Progressive Party in a very short period of time established full control over the prosecution of and investigation of organized crime. This decisive victory in the elections enabled the Serbian Progressive Party also to completely eradicate mechanisms of checks and balances in Serbia. So we can we have determined that Serbian Progressive Party and Vučić himself completely marginalized independent state institution. At the first place, ombudsperson, Commissioner for Free Access to Information and State Audit Institution, but also we can we identified that Serbian Progressive Party completely eradicated mechanisms of checks and balances within the state institutions, because it was usual before that that political parties that formed the government share the spoils of political victory. So, for instance, Director of Security Intelligence was loyal to Serbian Progressive Party, but his deputy was loyal to Socialist Party, coalition partner of the Serbian Progressive Party. But that was no longer the case. Serbian Progressive Party was in a position to establish deep control of state security institutions. So there was no witnesses anymore, because in the previous time, those kind of sharing of power between coalition partners was beneficial in a certain way, because they keep eye on each other, and there were no significant misuse of power before 2012. But now, and especially 2014 and so on, and 2015. But now it is completely different, because Serbian Progressive Party was able to establish deep control over the state institutions. But also, what is very important to notice, that this huge power, accumulation of power, Aleksandar Vučić used for establishing full control over his own party. So he used this opportunity to completely marginalize the very founder of Serbian Progressive Party, and that is Tomislav Nikolic. So he persuaded him somehow, you can guess, not to run for another term in a presidential election in 2017. And he was able, and he was in a position to completely purge the Serbian Progressive Party from the individuals who were loyal to Tomislav Nikolic. So actually, what we are now witnessing is a full control of security and state institutions that exist in Serbia, that is completely unchecked. There is no external oversight over state security institutions, but also there is no pluralism within Serbian Progressive Party. So there is no wonder that we can witness so many scandals, and that we can witness misuse of security institutions for personal and party gains. There are a number of cases where journalists are being intimidated, where activists are being attacked by the members of ruling political party, or those who are linked to ruling political party. So no wonder then we can also witness huge scandals. I can only mention two of them, and that is Krušik and Jovanjica. And I don't want to elaborate more in detail about them, because I'm sure that my colleagues will follow up and will speak more about them.
Yes, we will speak about Krušik a bit later. Thank you, Predrag, for giving us the political context of the issue. And what is leaning on the political context is the security services and the role of security services, and in how they are used in this so-called state capture. More on that subject we will hear from Jelena Pejić-Nikić.
Thank you very much. Well, capturing security services is always tempting for political leaders. First of all, security services have exclusive and access to exclusive and secret information, which then gives them influence on major political developments. And in addition, what is specific for Serbia is that 2 out of 3 security services have police powers. That is to detain, arrest, which is just for civilian service, and to participate in criminal investigations by applying special measures such as secret surveillance. So no wonder that it was actually the security intelligence system that was first targeted by the new regime after the elections in 2012, just as Predrag mentioned. How does the capturing of the security services actually function? We can see that through legislative changes, increasing political control over the services by appointing persons with proved loyalty to the party, notwithstanding their lack of expertise or professional experience. Then increasing the budget for the services, which I believe my colleague will later elaborate more. Then larger political influence on the policy of human resources within the services. And of course, this was coupled with less and decreasing transparency, while all the oversight mechanisms were neutralized, and some of those mechanisms Predrag already mentioned. Well, the problem with, I think I would just like to say that I would focus more on the civilian security service, that is Security Information Agency, or abbreviated in Serbian BIA, because it is more powerful and has more influence on political developments. Together with the taking over of the National Security Council and the position of the Secretary, which actually controls all the flows of intelligence information, which is an official legal form. We also had parallel coordination mechanisms made with no legal grounds. For example, a special headquarters in the Ministry of Defense with the purpose to protect the president, where also information not only from military services but also from the police and the BIA were gathered. On the other hand, well, as I said, we had at key positions, top of positions, persons were appointed with no expertise, no experience. However, they had beforehand proven their loyalty to the party and to the president. When it comes, then these people who were appointed, their powers were increased through legislative changes. For example, the law on BIA was always scarce, was always of low quality, but those gaps in the law were never fixed. For example, the position of the director, how is he elected, what is his mandate and how long it lasts, was never regulated. But with legislative changes, they were not solved, but in the opposite direction, his powers were increased. His powers to control the finance, the human resources policy, some documents of the BIA were guaranteed automatically to be secret, which is not according to the Constitution and the laws governing publicity of information and secrecy of information. Then these persons led the human resources policy, which actually there are data that already in 2013 a lot of new people were hired, which 3 or 4 people more than in the preceding years, and a lot of more people were retired which tells us that actually servicemen and agents were carefully selected from those who will be loyal or are always proved to be loyal or not. This, as I said, what is specific to Serbian security services is that they have the right to apply secret investigative measures such as interception of communications. And this is not the European standard. Most European security services do not have do not participate in criminal investigations, and that is what even the EU requested from Serbia on its European path, and that is to guarantee independence of the criminal police from the services. However, years have passed and no progress has been made in this regard, and also no will was shown for the real reform, which can be concluded from the latest revision of the action plan for Chapter 24, Regulating Justice, Freedom, and Security. So why was this never given up? Because it is a way for for politicians to influence through captured services, also police investigations. That means that you can guarantee to persons, corrupt persons or organized crime which is linked to the ruling party, you can guarantee them impunity, because you know they will, the service will never find evidence supporting allegations against those persons, or it will on purposely hinder any investigation or leak information to people who could get under surveillance. Also, this power is misused against all those critical voices of society. In 2018, a high official of BIA stated that actually, according to his assessment, the internal enemy is the greatest threat to Serbian security. And who is internal enemy? It is all the critical voices. As he said, those were parts of the civil society, media, opposition, and even unions who act against the interest of the state in his interpretation. And this is crucial to explain how the captured service is used actually to capture all the rest of the state and the society. And it is through intimidation, through smear campaigns, orchestrated mostly by the media, through direct attacks and threats to these people. So we have in our larger study, which is to be published, we actually have listed examples of which we know through whistleblowers or through media. For example, when BIA leaked personal information and photographs of a journalist to a tabloid, who then used it for smear campaign against this journalist. Then when civil society organization that deals with ecology issues, where a lot of money flows, was also investigated by BIA. When a professor who discovered that the doctorate of our Minister of Finance was actually plagiarized, he also said that he was contacted by BIA to lay low, etc., etc. Even the president, in this case of Jovannica, where a major marijuana plantation was found on Serbian territory, even the president afterwards said that these criminals had protection from the security sector institutions, including the services. So captured services do not serve the interest of the state. They serve the interest of the party. They cannot protect the state or the citizens from organized crime. Perhaps if you have the way how the personnel is chosen also tells us they are not professionals who can assess the real threats and prevent them. That was also to be noticed when the arsenal of weapons was found near the president, the Vucic's family house. He was then not the president, by the prime minister. All the oversight mechanisms do not work. Those who work, people who did oversight were also under major smearing campaigns. So the policy or the mechanism is to put persons, loyal persons, as head of these institutions. And Predrag already mentioned that that also happened not only in the independent institutions, but also in the judiciary, where key positions who should oversee whether, for example, the measures of secret surveillance are applied according to the law. Those people are always friends, close friends of the president and of the top officials of the ruling party.
Thank you, Jelena, for the key points on the security services on the issue. The role of security services and police are often overlapped in our history, and at the present moment, at least in the broader view of the public. More on the capturing of the police, we will hear from Sasha Đorđević.
Thank you, Milan, for the introduction. Good afternoon to all participants in this virtual panel discussion. So at the beginning of this presentation, I will brief you, explain what is the police in Serbia, and after that, what are the main mechanisms for capturing the police. So basically, the police in Serbia is part of the Ministry of Interior, which is one of the largest ministries in state administration, and almost 7% of employees in the public sector actually work in the Ministry of Interior. And right now, Serbia has 566 police officers per 100,000 inhabitants, which is almost double than the European Union average or the standard recommendation by the United Nations, which is 300. So to conclude, police in Serbia is a huge system with broad authorities and powers, including the use of force and special investigative techniques such as wiretapping. According to the research in the last 4 years, so basically we can conclude that there are 3 main mechanisms for capturing the police in Serbia. First is that actually executive power manipulates the police and in that way secure impunity for the ruling political elite and its principal allies. And I will give you some concrete examples. For example, police and prosecution keep on silent when the retired head of Serbia criminal police, which is basically the second person in the police hierarchy, revealed in an interview about the complex ties between the police, politicians, and criminal groups. In particular, the ex-head of criminal police spoke about direct ties between a Serbian health minister with criminal gangs. After that, police and prosecution keep completely silent. Another case which is connected with one of the biggest infrastructure projects in Serbia is the Belgrade Waterfront. And it's connected when a group of masked persons occupied one street in Belgrade, very close to the city center, used force and threats to several individuals, preventing them from leaving that area. And during this time, bulldozers demolish a group of privately owned buildings. And in spite of the fact that several citizens called the police and reported the event, the police took no action and redirected to citizens to another service, which is communal police, and citing orders from the top of the police. After that, following that incident, the current president of the republic and at the time the president of the government said that the highest Belgrade authorities were behind the demolition, while the wife of the ex-major at that time, who is right now the Minister of Finance, said to the media that he organizes demolition. So basically, that event happened 4 years ago, and right now the investigation on this case is still in a pre-phase, since police did not respond to requests by the prosecution. In parallel, the executive power is constantly commenting the ongoing investigation. In this context, there is also one information which is connected with this manipulation by political elites for the police. Basically, there is a constriction of information available on political sensitive cases or the human resource management in the Ministry of Interior. For example, last year, the Ombudsman requested the Ministry of Interior to share with journalists information about the traffic accident when one person died, and that involved a high representative of the ruling party. So basically, in the end, without respect to the legal deadlines for this, the Ministry of Interior did eventually share the requested information, but hid important aspect of it. The second mechanism for capturing the police in Serbia is basically that police departments that perform a PR function are basically used to promote the political power of the ruling elite. And this is very connected with the fight against organized crime and corruption in Serbia, which is full of populist rhetoric that combines elements of politicians' high promises to citizens and police actions of arresting hundreds of people in only one day without a clear record of accomplishment of investigation and epilogues in courts. And populism intensity is typical greater before the election or possible election. But what is interesting right now, because we are right now in the campaign, the fight against organized crime is corruption is completely out of focus. But in the past, basically the ruling party came to power on the back of a campaign promising a war of corruption and organized crime. The second element is mass police arrest actions. So basically, they rarely end up in any court judgments. For example, in January 2018, police arrested 220 persons, and politicians presented this operation as a huge success in fighting organized crime. However, police results are very poor. Prosecution released 2/3 of arrested persons. In addition, prosecution decides not to act against almost 50 arrest persons, since the police have not filed criminal charges against them. And in the end, the prosecution office for fighting organized crime, who is the central anti-organized crime institution in the country, did not even participate in the action. So in the end, the third mechanism for capturing the police in Serbia is basically politicization of the human resource management in the police and in the Ministry of Interior. We have in Serbia, the National Parliament Assembly adopted a new law on police in 2016, and that law was quite in line with the EU standards and stipulated rules for recruitment and promotion that made it mandatory to hold an open call for vacancies. But however, 2 years after the adoption of this law, the National Assembly, the Parliament, actually changed the law. And the 2018 amendments to the law on police raised concerns because broader discretion powers of the Ministry of Interior, who is actually the very top official in the ruling party, basically discretion powers in the recruitment process, then contrary to in relation to the previous version of the law. Basically, another argument is that bylaw, which is internal organization and systematization rulebook, which is in Serbia confidential document, have been modified 4 times from June 2018 until April 2019. And the third element, why is the human resources management in the police complicated, is basically the statutory organization and budgetary status of the police academy, university is unsolved. And what we also find out in our research, that there are strong signals that is unknown in advance who will succeed in the internal competition within the Ministry of Interior. So to conclude, one of the basic problems in Serbia is basically that operational independence of the police doesn't exist. There is too much influence of the politics and the political elites on investigation. This is why actually we in Serbia, we don't have court epilogues of high cases of corruption and organized crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. As we already heard during this panel, policing is not exclusively a tool of the Interior Ministry, but also of the part of the military. So for the key points on the capture of the military, I'll pass the mic to Katarina Đokić.
Thank you, Milan. Yes, so if you are a potential state captor, you may find Serbian defense sector enticing for two reasons. First, because it comprises some elements such as military police or military security and intelligence services, which could of course be used for strengthening political power, for instance, by intimidating political opponents or conducting surveillance over them. At the same time, it's out of those three parts of the security sector, it's the one wielding most resources, especially given that the largest arms manufacturers in Serbia are actually publicly owned enterprises. Also, we have a trend of increasing defense expenditure in Serbia. So, for instance, between 2015 and 2019, Serbian defense expenditures more than doubled. Which means there is a huge potential for extracting resources, especially if you consider that, unlike, for instance, in construction sector, here you have a special perk of being able to conceal everything by using national security interests as justification. Now, before I move on to transparency, I would just like to mention one structure, long-term factor, which has actually acted as an enabler of state capture in defense sector in Serbia, and that's incomplete and sometimes inefficient or ineffective defense sector reforms, which have rendered it vulnerable to abuse. For instance, Serbia has traditionally not defined its defense policy priorities, which means there is a huge maneuver space for opportunism and for arbitrary direction of money for those defense investment projects, which some people may find particularly interesting for their own personal reasons. Now, what are specific mechanisms facilitating state capture processes in defense sector of Serbia? I will highlight three. The first one is systematic undermining of transparency through changes in regulation, from internal regulation to government bylaws to legislation at national level. And we are observing this process since 2014. So, of course, defense sectors worldwide are not particularly transparent and not really the most transparent parts of the public sectors. But here we are facing a situation where Serbia is lowering even those standards it already attained. So now all defense documents or all particular types of defense-related documents can be a priori classified, which is contrary even to Serbia's own legislation on data secrecy. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons why defense officials may decide to classify certain documents is if they fear that their revelation would undermine public trust in the lawfulness of the work of the Ministry of Defense. So this is not something I assess. This is something that's actually in written regulation. And it is, of course, giving carte blanche to those defense officials who are seeking to conceal some corrupt practices. The second mechanism is actually the detrimental combination of strengthening discretionary powers of the Minister of Defense and informal decision-making, ever-increasing informal decision-making. For instance, we can see this in the armament process. So since 2016, the Minister of Defense can override well-established defense planning process to push for those projects he or she deems to be urgent. And then at the same time, we have an increase in defense expenditure, but it's not just what you see in the budget at the beginning of the year. In fact, Serbian defense sector spends much more, and very often you can't find any written trail showing where that money comes from. Is that a donation? Is that money which was reallocated throughout the budgetary year? Who made the decision and how? So if we look at just 2018, it was pretty dramatic because defense spent 30%, over 30% more than it was actually assigned through the budget, and there is no written trail showing where that money came from. The third mechanism is actually weakening civilian control of the armed forces. Yes, in Serbia, we do have civilian control of the armed forces, but it's only political control. While at the same time, the power of civil servants, which was delicate enough, has been shrinking. And the best evidence for this is the fact that the highest rank civil servant positions in the Ministry of Defense, those of deputy ministers, have been either vacant or filled with temporary personnel for years now. What are the consequences of all these phenomena? In the short term, defense institutions are rendered vulnerable, they are disoriented and prone to all kinds of abuse. But in the long term, it's actually quite concerning that we are now seeing reverse of hard-fought defense reform processes which brought Serbia a bit closer to the European Union also in terms of defense. So a reversal of this reversal would be really a painstaking, difficult process which would take years. And it's, of course, very concerning if Serbia has any intentions to integrate into, for instance, European common security and defense policy. And also another thing is that these tendencies are also prone to negatively affect regional stability. So if you have highly non-transparent armament process with a lot of money pumped into defense sector, of course, neighbors eventually become distrustful, and this is something we can notice in the region. So it's not just about corruption in Serbia, it's about how it affects regional stability and security. This was a very short summary of our findings on defense, and I would stop here, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions or comments.
Thank you, Katarina. So thank you for your key points on capturing the military. And now we'll go to Marija Ignjetijević and the role of the parliament, or should we say the lack of activities of National Assembly concerning this issue.
Thank you very much, Milan, and good afternoon to everyone. Well, even though Parliament is not directly part of the security sector, it should have played an important role while all these processes and affairs have happened. It should have monitored them and reacted properly. However, that was unfortunately not the case. On the contrary, the role of National Assembly in overseeing the security sector has been drastically degraded in the past few years, particularly since 2016. The level of parliamentary control in Serbia was never on a particularly high level. However, there were some improvements before 2016, and now we can speak about the captured parliament and the role of the parliament in capturing the security sector. And why is that? What is the difference now is actually that in the past few years, there was a widespread legalization of bad practices through parliamentary procedures. So previously, there was avoiding to implement certain law. There was a misuse of certain legal loopholes, but now there was an intention to legalize bad and corruptive practices. And when we speak about the capture of the parliament and its role in further capturing the security sector, there are two dimensions which are important, which deserve attention. One is changing the content, very substance of the laws regulating security sector, and the other one is capturing the very legislative procedure and obstructing the work of the parliament. Now, when it comes to the content of the laws, these core laws regulating security sector have been changed multiple times in the past few years in order to increase discretionary powers of the security officials, to decrease transparency, to limit oversight, external oversight over the security sector. And I will give just a few brief examples. Jelena has already mentioned how the director of the Security Information Agency has gained greater powers in managing human resources. So he was granted powers to basically employ someone without a competition procedure. Just one of the examples. Also, the law on public procurement has been amended, and now the security actors do not have an obligation to report to the National Assembly about the procurement in the field of defense security. So this is a basically limitation of any kind of external oversight over confidential procurement. There are a lot of examples, but I will pass on to the other dimension, which is the capturing of the very legislative procedure, which was enabled by misusing the existing legal mechanisms in order to ensure that the executive decisions are smoothly passed through the parliament. So I will mention some of these misuses and mechanisms. For example, there was an extensive use of urgent procedures in the past few years. So without any clear and logical justification, it was used in order to avoid public discussions. Also, a very popular practice during this past convocation was when the ruling party and the ruling coalition actually would submit a huge number of amendments to a certain law or document being discussed. And I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of very similar amendments just to shorten the time for discussion and to prevent oppositional MPs to contribute. Also, it is important to mention the committees in charge of overseeing security sector. These committees have been very passive in the past few years, and their role has mostly come down to just adopting draft laws, confirming international agreements, and just formally reviewing reports of the security sector actors. A big problem in the work of these committees is that only a small number of MPs actually had a security clearance, so the certificate necessary to access confidential data. And a small number of those who did were actually from the ruling party. Also, duration of the sessions of these committees speaks a lot about the quality of the debates that were that took place in these committees. I will just mention one illustrative example. At the end of last year, there was a committee session where MPs were supposed to discuss two core strategic documents, so the National Security Strategy and Defense Strategy, alongside with some other two laws and a decision. And this session lasted only for 28 minutes. And all of these documents were just forwarded to the plenary without any discussion whatsoever. So I'm going to stop here, because if I continue with these misuses and different mechanisms that were used to prevent parliamentary oversight, I could go for a very long time. And I would conclude and wrap up with the thought that this legislative function and this oversight role of the parliament has been misused in order to change the rules in a legal way and to legalize bad practices, just to simply transfer them from practice to the paper. And that is how this National Assembly was captured and how it further contributed to capturing the security sector.
Thank you, Maria. All of you have noted some of the affairs concerning security sector, and some of them you put in the report as entrefiles, just in short bits. But to one specific affair, you devoted whole chapter. So it is the Krušik affair. So Katarina, why is it so?
Thank you. Yes, so Krušik is arms manufacturing company, which is of course publicly owned and was in the center of a huge affair late 2019. And it's a very interesting case because it summarizes quite a few of the problems we have now addressed. So firstly, there was a broker which enjoyed a privileged position in the arms trade, and it wasn't just any broker, any private company. It was actually a company which is linked to the Minister of Interior, the current one. Secondly, it turned out that the prices at which this broker sold Krušik's arms abroad were much higher than those which were defined in their contract with Krušik. And they couldn't provide reasonable justification why prices had suddenly gone up. So there is a solid ground to be suspicious about extraction of public resources. Furthermore, much of the information we got about this case, we got thanks to a whistleblower who was, instead of being protected for his efforts, actually punished and arrested, which seems ludicrous, but that's the way it was. He was arrested for revealing confidential business information. And then interestingly, Bia, Jelena talked a lot about, was also somehow involved in this business, even though you wouldn't expect civilian intelligence service to be arresting whistleblower. Not whistleblower, but the person who is charged of revealing business secrets. And it turned out that Bia had other kinds of liaisons with Krušik. For instance, investigative journalists revealed that it had received some donations from them. There was no external oversight, or when it emerged, it was really very timid, it was very lukewarm. And at the end of the day, if we talk about international consequences of corruption or state capture processes in Serbia, this could also be an example, because it's still very debated, but I mean, there is evidence that some of weapons from Krušik ended up in Yemen. So it's also about externalizing instability which is generated by state capture processes in Serbia.
Thank you, Katarina, for this extra explaining the Krušik affair and why is it a special chapter of this report devoted to this affair. Thank you all speakers, the authors of the chapters of this report, and for some reflections on this report by Belgrade Center for Security Policies. We go to Dr. Reinhard Priebe, former official of the European Commission and also known as the one of the authors of the series of reports considering North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina from 2015 to 2019. Dr. Priebe, first of all, how do you find this research and this report?
Thank you very much, and let me first say thank you for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. I have read with great interest the report and the very, very good, I must say, presentations this afternoon, which added quite a lot to what was written down in paper. This is an impressive research and with very interesting findings, and I can only encourage you to, on that basis, to continue your research. Now, it's a bit difficult for me where to start, and it will be even more difficult for me where to end. There's so much to say on this. I think in the introduction of the report, it is mentioned that the European Commission in 2018, in its enlargement strategy, mentioned that there are elements of state capture in all Western Balkan countries. As far as I see, this was the first time where in an official EU document in relation to the Western Balkans, there was mention of the phenomenon of state capture. And as you rightly say in your introduction, in your report, this came quite as a shock to the region. And I've heard this from many sides myself, because normally people associate the notion of state capture to banana republics, maybe Central Asian oligarch systems, and whatever you mean, but it was quite a surprise, as far as I see, in the countries of the Western Balkans, that the European Commission in an official document linked the situation of the Western Balkan countries to state capture. Maybe it was only a surprise or to some officials and politicians, and maybe it was less of a surprise to the public in the countries. Now, indeed, state capture is a very strong word, and I have to confess that I personally have always been a bit skeptical with the use of this word. You will, in the 3 reports of rule of law expert group, which I shared, which you just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I think find a mention of the word state capture only once in the first report on Macedonia, and with a skeptical remark on it. And what I'm saying now on my doubts on state capture doesn't affect the quality of your work. You have well noticed the danger of this very general notion and the traps. It is a buzzword in a certain way. And my skepticism is a bit that the notion is very broad and not extremely clear. If you speak about capture of a state, the first question is, of course, by whom? Is it by private company? And as far as I see, originally the word state capture was first used by the World Bank in the context of some discussion with South Africa. And that was very much on some big companies taking hold of the state. All you have said, as far as I see, is not at all that kind of state capture. It is rather the state capture by a political party, maybe by a politician who originally having been elected as president or as prime minister, evolves in his behavior towards this sort of dictatorship. State capture could also be something coming very much from within the system. When we examined rule of law problems in Macedonia, it was very much the capture of the judiciary by the government, which is not a state capture from outside, but it's a capture of one institution by the other, capture of the government by the government of something which is meant to be independent. One of you also made an effort to distinguish state capture from corruption. You could also make an effort to distinguish it from nepotism. Again, my experience in having looked in quite some detail into the Macedonian situation, we spotted quite a lot of nepotism, which is perhaps linked to the fact that this is much smaller state than Serbia. So state capture can be useful to underline that something very serious is happening. And as has been mentioned in the presentation, that something systematic is happening. It's a strategic effort to get control of state institutions, but we have to be aware that you should not fall in the trap, and you didn't do it with your paper, to put under state capture things which are in detail very, very different. But your detailed analysis of the military, of the police and the parliament shows that you are well aware of this. There's another point for reflection, and that is a point where I would very much all of you encourage to reflect very carefully on it. In my understanding, it's not very easy to say it in a weak way. It's very difficult, in fact, to draw the borderline between what is state capture and what is normal behavior in a democratic system, or what is a still acceptable behavior of a democratic system. And I give you some examples, which are, by the way, linked to some points you raise in your report. to a certain extent, it is, in my view, normal in a functioning democracy that a party which is a government, so a ruling party, tries to get things to a certain extent under control. So, and it is also to a certain extent normal that a government seeks to exploit its majority in the parliament to get decisions being made. And even, I would say, to a certain extent, you have rules everywhere in all well-functioning democracies that laws exceptionally can be adopted in urgency procedures. So and you even have many systems, like in my country, where prosecutors who prosecute in criminal investigations are under the orders of a minister of justice. That doesn't exist in all countries, and some countries find this quite shocking that it exists, has always existed in Germany, to give you an example. So these are things where you have, if these powers are exercised in a moderate, in a reasonable way, you would say it's part of the normal functioning. But where it goes wrong, when systematically these possibilities are used to get control of everything beyond the normal rules. So when violating, trespassing the rules becomes the rule and not the exception. Some of you mentioned that as a method of capturing the state, laws have been changed, and you gave good examples for that. I have the impression that normally it is not the primary method to capture a state, to change legislation. It is rather to exploit unclear, imperfect, incomplete legislation. And it is rather on the side of behavior. And as has also been mentioned in the presentation, of putting pressure on officials to get things under controls. And rather exceptionally, it is that even laws are explicitly modified. By the way, the reason for that is, in my perception, that when you modify a law, the thing becomes very transparent and visible. If you apply more subtle methods, then the thing is less visible and is more difficult to be contested. I think it is very, very good that you have concentrated your studies on state capture phenomena in Serbia on the security sector. It is quite clear where you have attempts of state capture, those who do it, the state capturers, always target those parts of the public institutions or structures which are the most sensitive in the political sense, and which are the easiest to get control of the entire system. In other words, if you have, and that was a subject of my investigations in Macedonia and Bosnia and in other cases, if you have control as a government of the independent judiciary, or if you make sure that the judiciary is not really independent, you have a very powerful tool to control the whole system, the whole country, and all the institutions. And the same is true for the security sector. If you look back to European Union efforts to get your region closer to EU enlargement, over many years you will find that the EU didn't pay quite a lot of attention to what is going on in the security sector. This is a bit linked to the fact that security policies only to a modest extent are European policies. They are within the European Union very much national policies. So in other words, it's not a broad EU competence to deal with security matters. But recently, everybody has become aware that if there are serious shortcomings in the security sector, and you very brilliantly mentioned them, then you have a problem with the rule of law. You have a problem with functioning of the democracy. And you very often also have a serious problem with respect of fundamental human rights. So therefore, to look into this in depth is very important. And it was, for me, I have to say, a discovery when I chaired this rule of law experts group on our first report for Macedonia in 2015 to see what enormous disaster a uncontrolled intelligence service can do a country, and how an uncontrolled intelligence service can simply put an obstacle for any progress of that country towards European integration. That was the case in Macedonia, where, by the way, at the time, now things have changed. It happened that the chief of the most important intelligence service was a cousin of the prime minister. But so that was not a case of nepotism, it was a case of cousinism, or whatever you would call that. But you can...
Now that you mentioned North Macedonia, this report that we are discussing today mentions that report that you took part in shaping it for North Macedonia in 2015, colloquially called by your name, although you don't like to call it Priebe report.
I don't want to call it Priebe report because we were 5 people writing this report, and the best pieces of these reports were not written by myself.
Do you find any resemblance, or can you draw some parallel between?
Yes, I was coming to that. By the way, just to finish a point I made, you don't need to go to Macedonia or to Bosnia to see how decisive security services can be and how destructive they can be, especially also if you look to the European perspective of the country. Well, the long years discussions, some of you are maybe too young to recall that, on the EU insisting that the war criminals should be delivered to the Hague Tribunal, War Crimes Tribunal. Well, it was a discussion where the security services of Serbia were hiding the suspects and were making sure that they were not delivered to the Hague, and that delayed the whole process of Serbia getting closer to starting accession negotiations, for example, for many years. Now, I wanted to, and this is, Mr. Chairman, coming also to your question, I wanted to maybe give you another little warning and encouragement at the same time. Most of the issues you have mentioned in your report and what you and your presentations are issues which you find in a very similar way in other countries in the region. Not only that, you find it in other countries all over the world, and even worse, you find it to a certain extent also in some EU member states. So Serbia is not alone with these problems. And saying that, there's a danger in saying that, because it could lead people in the system saying, well, why are you so excited? These things are being criticized in so many other countries, including some EU member states. So it is not such a problem that we are saying. This would be certainly wrong to see it like that. The state capture and all the different elements of it will at the end prevent countries in your region to join the European Union or even getting closer to Union if not major improvements are being made. But it is important also to say your country shouldn't do it to get into the EU. It should be done in the interest of the population of the country. And the other thing is you have many similarities of the problems you have spotted in the other Western Balkan countries, despite the fact, of course, that you have different issues and differences, nevertheless, between each of the countries. For example, I don't think that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, state capture is the biggest problem. In Bosnia and Herzegovina is the dysfunctionality of the constitutional setup, in my view, is a much bigger problem than state capture. the constitutional setup of Bosnia and Herzegovina is so detailed and so complicated and so multi-layer that even for state captures it's difficult to find the right place to capture somebody or some institution. So there are differences, but nevertheless, there are also similarities. What is certainly very important in my view is that civil society is being mobilized. And I understand your institute is part of civil society, so you are doing a very important work. And this is even more so because within your system, and I've seen this in the other countries, you have on paper and in the law, you have quite a lot of checks and balances, oversight institutions. You have an ombudsman, you have a data protection authority, you have very often anti-corruption offices, and so on. And what we unfortunately see, that although these institutions, these oversight bodies, which are all meant for different areas to control the state, within the state institutions, that they have on paper a lot of powers, but they don't exercise it. They don't have the courage to exercise it. So there is one aspect of state capture which none of you has mentioned. To capture a state, you need somebody who wants to capture it, but you have also somebody who is being captured, or who, in other words, who must have the power, the courage, and has to speak up to oppose the state capture. Many serious deficiencies we have discovered in North Macedonia in the judiciary. We had the feeling in our expert group, why don't they stand up? Why don't they have the courage to oppose? Well, it's easy to say from outside your country. If you have a post as a judge or as a policeman and you have a family to nourish, standing up against your biggest boss, the minister, is not an easy thing. But there is a problem that sometimes people within the system know that they can be captured and they behave like that, and they adapt to that and they don't oppose that. And since this is the case, even more so civil society is so important. So one thing I'm really curious about your report and your presentations and your further work is, what reactions will you have from those whom you are criticizing? You have to provoke reactions. You have to, of course, you will go public with that, but the worst thing would be, and I could assume that the official EU institutions and Brussels would criticize that very much. The worst thing would be that those who you criticize remain simply silent. But it can happen. So a discussion needs to be provoked. And even if in this discussion you will get arguments that on this and that particular issue you got it wrong, or you could see it differently, be open to be criticized. That is not the problem. But there needs to be a reaction of those who you are criticizing, so that a discussion is being triggered by that. Now, I will not go into all your 5 areas of the reports, and I must confess I'm ignorant on details or facts in your country, in Serbia. But I find it excellent that the first category on the report of state capture in the security sector started with the Parliament. Normally, and in the presentation was mentioned, normally one would not classify a parliament as part of the security sector. But you very rightly stated that a security sector where people have the habit in all countries, also in my home country, to work discreetly. They prefer secrecy to transparency and all this. That's to a certain extent for intelligence and police services, that is even to a certain extent normal. They need a strong control, and the strong control normally comes in the first place, besides other oversight bodies, comes from the Parliament. And it is indispensable that the Parliament exercises this control. And if you look at examples in other countries, in France, also in my country, you have a very strong parliamentary oversight of security services. And you even have in Berlin a mechanism of a parliament committee, which is the most top secret committee, because this is the committee which controls the secret services. And it works well because they work discreetly, but they control. And so you are totally right that this deficit of parliamentary control and misuse of the parliament, too many urgency proceedings and all this, is a very serious issue. By the way, I think it's a bit linked also to the fact that in your countries, in your region, parliaments are normally divided between the governing party and the opposition. But you have in parliaments, normally you should have, on matters like controlling the secret service, you should have a cross-party consensus. There should be an understanding. It's more important that we do this control business well than to shout as opposition to the governing party and the opposite way. And this understanding I have seen, at least in Macedonia, was totally missing. And then one last point, Mr. Chairman, I spoke too long. Several of you mentioned one thing which is perhaps the most important source of all these state capture problems. That is appointments and promotions within the public service in all areas: police, military, judiciary, whatever you want. That there is a strong tendency to appoint people or to get rid of people for political reasons, and not and the criteria of qualification is secondary, and it should be primary to any nomination. And I'm saying this is in particular to a country, you are at the end, you are the biggest country in the Western Balkans, but you are a small country. You have less population than Belgium. And a small country, even less than a big country, can afford to nominate unqualified people to key positions in their state administration. And I'm very convinced, and the same is true for promotions to get on the higher ranks in the system. I'm very convinced that unless this is not being changed, and there is not an understanding that the most important thing to make progress, economic progress, democracy progress, rule of law progress, is to have qualified people in the system, in the public administration, who are motivated, and to have promotions in the public administration which are based on qualification in the first place, and not on political nepotism and things like that. That is essential. Now, people can well argue that you find many bad examples, not only in your part of Europe, but also in other parts of Europe. And certainly, if I may say so, I hope that amongst the participants there are not too many Americans. You find many bad examples in these days also across the Atlantic. But qualification for the public service as the main criteria for recruiting officials in all parts of the public administration, and for promoting them to higher ranks, this is for me the most important single element in fighting against state capture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priebe, for your reflections, for your recommendations, for your time and shown interest in this research. And now we came to the questions of the audience. Some of them came in preparation of this web panel. Some of them came during this conference. And the first one is from Vasilis Selinas Skilaris from ACT and Demo organization. He rephrased his question he sent us before to the next one. In the framework of the participatory and deliberative model of democracy, through enhanced civic action in peaceful means, thus becoming the fourth branch of governance, how can the citizens enhance transparency in political processes, and eventually ensure the independency of the security sector against other parties' involvement, thus against state capture from political parties, elites and leaders, and economic interests at large. This question is, I think, best addressed to Jelena.
Yes, thank you, Milan, and thanks for the question. Of course, the citizens, the people, are the carriers of sovereignty. In Serbia, and according to Serbian constitution, no party or not one individual can hijack this sovereignty. So I guess the first step for citizens is to be well informed of their rights, informed about events and developments in the society. And it is not an easy step because you have to carefully read what's going on and to discern fake news from the real ones, to check sources, etc. But this is essential if you want to make well-informed decisions while engaging in key democratic processes such as elections. Also, citizens can use mechanisms available. First of all, use their rights, then defend their rights, and defend the rights of all, or the rights of other people. When I say to use their rights, that I first of all mean the right to seek information, to be informed, through freedom of access to information, requests to key institutions. They can defend their own rights by reporting abuse, mistreatment, corruption, by initiating procedures before independent institutions, to go public via several independent media, to go to courts, to constitutional courts when it concerns the violations of constitutional rights, or how can I say, unconstitutional clauses in bad legislation. And then the next step is to engage in defending the rights of others and the rights of us all by signing petitions, participate in activism campaigns, etc. All of this, however, is very hard. It takes a lot of courage to do this, even to use your own right, and let alone to defend other people's rights, such as whistleblowers, in a system which is captured when you do not believe institutions. But I guess that what we can do as civil society is to give support and protection for these people, to say that they are not alone. And that is actually what the Belgrade Center for Security Policy tries to do, according to its new strategy. That is to join up forces with other civil society organizations to provide different kinds of support and to amplify voices of those people who actually have information and want to engage in deconstructing the state capture.
Thank you, Jelena. We have another one from Valeska Esch from the Aspen Institute in Germany, and it is about the role of the third actors such as China and Russia. What is the role they play in capturing the security sector? How do they contribute to this, and how big is their influence on those structures? Predrag, if you may.
Thank you, Milan. Yes, third parties can influence definitely on the state capture, and that is being done through corrosive capital. State capture and state captors actually provide excellent opportunity for corrosive capital in Serbia. So they attract capital that is corruptive, and that capital that can actually support their narrow interest on the expenses of the public good. So actually, what we are now witnessing is that Serbia is getting loans from, for instance, from China, and somebody else is going to pay off these loans. Nobody cares from the elites, ruling elite, who is going to return these loans. And also, this is an excellent opportunity for the Serbian political elites to showcase that there is a good political alternative to EU and Western societies that has been promoted in the past, for instance, 15 or 20 years since the overthrow of autocratic regime of Slobodan Milosevic. So they are trying to mimic the regimes in China to showcase that actually there is a good alternative, for instance, in Turkey, that there is a possibility to lead politics that is neutral, that is in accordance to national interests, that is completely isolated or from external influence of EU or United States, that completely suits to the interest of the main country. Also, the foreign influence could be used and as a safe haven. For instance, Gruevski fled to Hungary via Albania, Montenegro, and Serbia to Hungary. So actually, there is a huge understanding between this kind of political regimes that nurture autocratic practices in the country. Also, Serbia relies on the Russia, and it is possible that Russia exert political influence to Serbia in order to establish control.
Thank you, Predrag, for this one. And the next one is for Katarina, coming from Vladimir Erceg from Save the Children. He asks, in your article, you claim that the risks of corruption in public procurement and financial management in Serbia worsened since 2014. I think we can agree that the public will claim this is not a new thing, and that the corruption in procurement and public finance was widespread and endemic even before 2014 and 2012. Why do the arguments you make support the thesis of captured state now and not for a period before 2014?
Well, this is the moment when I have to disagree with Dr. Priebe, because I think legislation is the key, and especially trends in legislation. So for instance, when it comes to public procurement, you have a still valid law, which was passed in 2012 and which establishes some really strong anti-corruption mechanisms. And also for the first time prescribes parliamentary oversight of defense, procurement in defense and security, and actually puts it in the legal framework and not just as something that's, you know, completely free activity of defense and security institutions. And now we have a new law which is valid and which is in power from July, which abrogates all these achievements. And you know, I don't think it's coincidence. And very interestingly, this is all justified by the need to harmonize with the EU acquis. So you know, the EU integration is actually used as a way to abrogate some anti-corruption mechanisms and some really good standards of democratic oversight of security sector. So, you know, previously you did have practice, you did have corruption in practice, but it was something which was due to either weak laws or due to non-implementation or maybe to over-ambitiousness of the law which was passed in 2012. And now you actually have the situation where some bad practices are being sanctioned by legislative changes.
Thank you, Katarina. And we have one more for Maria that came from Bogdan Urošević during the conference. Question for Maria. Following the latest European Commission country report for Serbia in 2019, there was a public claim by the Speaker of the Parliament that the mentioned bad practices, for example, irrelevant amendments, urgent procedures, would be eradicated. The ruling party officials claim this promise was implemented. Would you say there is an improvement with regard to the legislative procedures since mid-2019? And could this help further legislative activity in the security sector?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Well, I will try to keep this simple. First, has this use of urgent procedures and amendments and different other mechanisms decreased? Yes, it has. But was that a result of some tendency to improve parliamentary oversight? I would say no. And I would say that it was directly linked to the boycott of the parliament. As you're probably familiar, a group of oppositional MPs are boycotting the Serbian parliament since February 2019. And that has certainly affected the quality of the parliamentary debate and has enabled the ruling majority to automatically and smoothly pass and approve all of the executive decisions. So I would say that they do not even have to try as hard as submitting amendments or using the urgency procedure. Now they can automatically pass all the executive decisions. And the role of the parliament, and I mean the degrading role of the parliament, was actually exposed during the state of emergency because of the pandemic of COVID-19, when the state of emergency was even, that was not in accordance with Serbian constitution, state of emergency was declared without the National Assembly.
Thank you, Maria. Dr. Priebe, you heard Katarina disagreed with you concerning the legislative framework on this issue. Do you want to say something extra concerning this topic?
I think that things are getting seriously better when the civil society in the country starts to criticize these remote international old men. Then I think things are really getting on the right track. The point I try to make, and you are certainly right on the public procurement example you mentioned, the point I wanted to make that the method of exercising, of capturing a state is very, very often a very subtle one, where it happens without any changes of the law, and where it very often even happens with giving the appearance that the law is respected. So that was the only point. I hope, Katarina, that you didn't say that the European Union forced to weaken public procurement rules in Serbia because of its acquis communautaire, and you certainly didn't intend to say that state capture is part of the acquis communautaire. But I see your point. Jelena said very pertinent things on what can you do, and of course many examples you gave what can be done is not easy to do, and people feel insecure. It's part of the climate of state capture in a country that people don't dare to say to do something that's normal. And maybe another element in all the countries of the region is that none of them has strong media. The media are weak, and I'm afraid that media will never be very, very strong in your countries, because big media press companies and all that are simply not interested to be very active in countries like yours because of the size of the country. So the deficiency in media is of course a big problem and makes it more difficult to make progress. There might be one other aspect, Mr. Chairman, I would like to briefly mention at the end of this discussion. Of course, the damage which is made by state capture is primarily also for the economy, because if you don't have state capture, you don't have a free economy and a functioning economy. You have interventions by the state capturers which are not in the interest of the prosperity of the country, but which are primarily in the interest of their own prosperity. And that is an aspect which should not be neglected. You concentrate on state capture in the security sector, but the disastrous consequences of state capture are also in the economic situation of the country concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Priebe. And regarding the question whether this problem existed even before 2014 or 2012, or existed in the lower scale or whatever, Sasha Georgievich has something to add.
Yeah. Just one brief comment. So in the past, for example, it's connected with the procurement and what was the situation in the past. And right now, for example, in the past, we have open competition for procurement of police patrol cars. But right now, what is the situation from 2017? It's not like that Ministry of Interior is buying, I don't know, 10 or 20 cars, but actually they bought more than 1,000 police car in secret manner. So basically in a confidential procedure, which is not a situation in the past, but actually that trend actually it's going on and further, and it's connected with the cooperation with China. That, for example, in 2019, the Ministry of Interior procured cameras from the Chinese company Huawei for the video surveillance in Belgrade. So this is also one of the new practice which is connected with different things, and in a broader context, it's very interesting to. I just want to add that. That's all.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you all for all the speakers, and thank you for all the attendees. This was the web panel on the subject of security sector in captured state in Serbia, and the report that Belgrade Center for Security Policy made. Thank you all for your time, and hope to see you on some similar occasion soon.